Let me tell you a story about my life, a story that will break your heart before it heals it, a story about how the world judged me, how my own family turned their backs on me, and how I learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the darkest moments. So sit with me, listen carefully, and don't look away, because by the end, you'll understand why I'm telling you this. My name is Esther Matthews, and this is what happened to me. I was born into love, real unconditional love. My parents, they were the kind of people who made you believe the world was good. My father, Ernest Matthews, was a successful merchant. My mother, Caroline Matthews, was the most beautiful soul I've ever known. They had wanted a child for so long. And when I arrived, I was their miracle, their only child, their everything. Do you know what it feels like to be loved like that? To wake up every morning knowing that two people in this world would move mountains for you? I did. I lived in that warmth every single day of my childhood. My parents didn't just provide for me. They shaped me. They taught me kindness when they could have taught me entitlement. They showed me humility when I had every reason to be proud. They gave me everything, but they never let me forget that having much meant I should give much. I remember my mother's hand. She would hold mine as we walked through the market, and she'd point to people who were struggling. Esther, she'd say softly, see that woman, she's working so hard. Let's buy from her. Let's make her day a little easier. My father would do the same. He'd employ people, not just because he needed workers, but because he saw their desperation and wanted to lift them up. They didn't raise me to be spoiled. They raised me to be human. But here's the thing about being happy and blessed in a family. Not everyone celebrates it with you. Some people watch your joy and feel only bitterness. Some relatives whispered that I was spoiled, that I was arrogant, that my parents had ruined me with too much love and too many gifts. They didn't see the girl who gave away her own clothes to servants. They didn't see me spending hours helping my mother care for sick people in our community. They saw only what they envied. A young girl with everything, and they hated me for it. I didn't understand that hatred then. I was too young, too innocent, too wrapped up in the safety of my parents' arms. That safety didn't last. I was 16 years old. It was an ordinary day, the kind of day you never think would change your life forever. My parents had taken me to the market. We'd spent the afternoon buying fabrics, fruits, and supplies for the house. My mother had her arm around my waist as we walked, laughing at something my father had said. I remember the smell of incense in the air. I remember the warmth of the sun on my skin. I remember feeling completely, utterly safe. On the way home, it happened. A carriage came around the corner too fast. The driver had lost control. I heard my mother scream. I felt my father push me down, his body shielding mine as the world exploded into chaos, metal, and pain. When everything went silent, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only lie there, my face against the dirt, and wonder if this was how the world ended. They rushed us to the hospital. I drifted in and out of consciousness, nurses moving around me, voices urgent and frightened. My ribs were badly bruised. My left leg was broken, but I survived. As I lay in that hospital bed, machines beeping around me, I kept asking about my parents over and over. I asked. The nurses would look at each other with these pained expressions and say, well, rest now, child. Just rest. 1 week? That's how long my parents fought. My father's injuries were too severe. My mother never stopped reaching for his hand, even as her own body was failing. I watched from my hospital bed as life drained from them. I watched as the two people who had loved me more than anything in this world simply left me. I cried a river. I cried so hard that the nurses had to sedate me. I cried like a person whose entire world had collapsed, because it had. At 16 years old, I was alone, completely, terrifyingly alone. But loneliness wasn't even the worst part. When the relatives came, the same ones who had whispered about me, who had resented my happiness, they came not to comfort me, but to collect. My father's assets, gone. The businesses, divided among the relatives, the house. They claimed it was part of my father's estate, and my uncle took it. His property sold, and me, I was left with a small storage room behind one of my father's old shops, a room made of wood and corrugated metal, a room I was supposed to call home. I was 17, broken in body and spirit, and I had nothing. I can't describe to you what those first months were like. It's hard to find words for that kind of despair. I would wake up in that storage room with the rats, and for a few seconds, I'd forget what had happened. Then reality would crash down on me like a wave, and I'd remember that I was alone, that my parents were gone, that my own family had turned me into a beggar in the streets. I took any job I could find. I cleaned houses for pennies. I washed clothes in the river until my hands bled. I sold vegetables in the market for barely enough to eat. I did whatever it took to survive, because surviving was the only thing I knew how to do anymore. There was no room for pride. There was no space for shame. There was only hunger and the need to fill it. Years passed. I was no longer a girl. I'd become a young woman, hardened by struggle, hollow from loss. My beauty faded from the inside out. The clothes I wore were rags. My hands were rough and scarred, but something inside me never completely died. Maybe it was my mother's voice, still reminding me to be kind. Maybe it was my father's strength encoded in my bones. I don't know. But even in my darkest moments, I never became cruel. I never became like those relatives who had destroyed me. That's when I met him. I was returning home one evening, carrying the few coins I'd earned that day. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. And for just a moment, I forgot how sad my life was. Then I heard the voice. "Please, does anyone have anything to spare?" I turned and saw him, a young man, maybe a few years older than me, sitting by the roadside with his eyes closed. Not closed like he was sleeping, closed because he couldn't see. He was blind. His clothes were even more tattered than mine. His face was thin, carved by hunger. He was alone, just like me. And somehow that recognition made my heart break open all over again. I stopped walking. I stood there looking at him, and something shifted inside me. All my own suffering, all my pain didn't matter in that moment. I saw someone who had it worse than me, and I made a choice that would change everything. I reached into my pocket and took out the money I'd earned that day. It wasn't much, just enough for one meal. Without thinking about what it meant for my own empty stomach, I placed it in his hand. He gasped. "May God bless you," he said, and his voice shook with tears. "May God reward your kindness 1,000-fold." I walked away before he could say more. I walked away hungry that night, but I walked away feeling something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose, a sense that maybe my life still meant something. From that day forward, I made helping him my mission. I would seek him out on my way home from work. Sometimes I'd give him money. Sometimes I'd bring him food. Sometimes I would just sit with him and talk, because I realized he was as lonely as I was. He had no one. He couldn't see the world around him, but he could hear me. And somehow that was enough for us both. We became friends in the way that only people who've suffered can be. There was no pretense between us, no games, just two broken people trying to make each other feel less alone. I learned his name was Clifton Barker. I learned he hadn't always been blind. He had a past, a life before this, though he didn't like to talk about it. I learned that he was kind and patient and had a sense of humor that could make me laugh even on the darkest days. But the city had other ideas about us. Rumors started. People began whispering that the poor orphan girls were spending time with the blind beggar. They said we must like each other. They said shameful things about what we might be doing together. The whisper started as a trickle and became a flood. And somehow those whispers reached my relatives. One day, my uncle, the same uncle who had taken my father's house, came to find me. He found me at the market, and his face was twisted with something I couldn't quite name. Anger, disgust, opportunity. Esther, he said coldly, we need to talk about this boy. My heart stopped. His name is Clifton, and he's my friend. You're going to marry him? The words hit me like a physical blow. What? No, I'm not. You're going to marry him, he repeated, and his voice was final. Everyone in the city knows you're involved with him. It's humiliating to the family. You've already shamed us enough by being a pauper. If you're going to associate with beggars, you're going to marry one. Consider it your punishment for bringing dishonor to our name. I begged him. I cried. I pleaded with him to listen to me, to understand that Clifton and I were just friends, that this was madness, but he wouldn't hear it. My other relatives came to me with the same message. They had found a way to completely remove me from the family, to sever any remaining ties, and they were going to take it. They would force me into a marriage with a blind beggar, and in doing so they would ensure that I could never come back, never claim any part of my family's wealth or reputation. They arranged the marriage without even asking Clifton's permission. They didn't ask mine either, not really. They simply informed us that we would be married. When Clifton found out, he was shocked. I'll never forget the look on his face when they told him. Confusion, pity, resignation. It was the same look I probably had on mine. We were married in a small ceremony, no celebrations, no joy, just two desperate people being bound together by cruelty and circumstance. After the ceremony, they didn't even let us have a moment alone. They packed us into a carriage and transported us out of the city to a place where poor people lived, a forgotten place. A place meant for people like us, people the world wanted to forget about. When Clifton and I were finally alone in our new home, a small hut that was barely better than my storage room, neither of us knew what to say. The silence was heavy with all the things we weren't saying. He was blind, so he couldn't see my tears. I was grateful for that. I sat in the corner and cried quietly while he sat across the room, and we both pretended the other didn't exist. That first night, I hated him, not because of who he was, but because of what he represented, the final nail in the coffin of my old life. He was proof that I would never recover from what had happened to me. I would never climb out of this pit. I would never have anything better. I would spend my life with a blind beggar, and the world would laugh at me for it. But here's what I didn't know. Hatred is just love waiting to happen. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. We had to figure out how to survive together, and survival has a way of breaking down walls. I would guide Clifton to the market where we could beg for money. We'd collect whatever coins people would give us, and I'd use that to buy rice and beans and whatever else we could afford. He would sit and wait while I worked, and somehow that waiting felt like a kind of love. One night, maybe 3 months into our marriage, something shifted. We were sitting outside our hut listening to the sounds of the night, and Clifton spoke. I'm sorry, he said quietly. So for what? I asked. Like for all of this, for being blind, for being poor, for dragging you down with me. His voice cracked. You deserved so much better than this. Something in those words broke through my anger, because he was right. I had deserved better, but it wasn't his fault. None of this was his fault. And suddenly I realized that he was suffering too. He was suffering because the world had deemed him unworthy, just like they had deemed me unworthy. We were both victims of the same cruelty, the same indifference. It's not your fault, I told him. And I meant it. None of this is your fault. And you know what? We're going to be okay. We're going to figure this out together. From that moment, something changed between us. The hatred didn't disappear. It transformed. It became fuel for survival. It became a bond. We started talking more. He would tell me about his past, about the man he used to be before blindness took that away from him. I would tell him about my parents, about the girl I used to be before loss consumed her. We became healers for each other, not in the sense that we made the pain go away, but in the sense that we made it bearable. And slowly, Without either of us quite realizing when it happened, I stopped hating him. I started loving him. It was the kind of love that grows in the dark, in silence, in the quiet moments between survival and despair. It wasn't passionate or dramatic. It was steady. It was real. It was the love that comes from knowing someone's deepest pain and choosing to stay anyway. Years passed. We were still desperately poor, but we had each other. And that made everything different. We developed a routine. We would go out begging in the mornings. The money was never enough, but it was something. I would work odd jobs in the afternoons, washing clothes, cleaning houses while Clifton waited. We'd come home exhausted and hungry, but we'd share what little we had, and it felt like a feast. One day, maybe 5 years into our marriage, I had an idea. We were lying on our mat, the baby inside me, kicking softly, and I couldn't sleep. Clifton, I said, what if we tried to start a business? He was quiet for a long moment. With what money? We can barely feed ourselves. With the money we've been saving, I said, we have a little bit, not much, but enough to start something small, a store. We could sell water or food, anything. We could try to build something instead of just surviving. I could feel his hesitation. People will mock you, he said finally. You'll be out there pregnant, hawking goods, and they'll mock you because of me, because I'm blind. They'll say cruel things. Let them, I told him. And I meant it. I don't care what they say anymore. I'm tired of just surviving, Clifton. I want to build something. I want our children to have more than this, don't you? He reached over and found my hand in the darkness. Yes, he whispered. Yes, I want that too. So we started small. I began selling water, pure, clean water along the roadsides. I'd fill large clay pots and carry them as my pregnancy grew heavier. Clifton would sit nearby, unable to help much physically, but there anyway, present, supporting me in the way he could. It was hard. I was ashamed sometimes watching the way people looked at us, the way they sneered at the pregnant woman hawking water on the streets, but I kept going. And then one day, everything changed again. A black Rolls Royce pulled up beside my stand. I'd never seen anything so beautiful, so impossibly luxurious in my entire life. My hand shook as I watched the man step out. He was dressed in expensive clothes, but it was his eyes that struck me. They were kind. They were seeing me, really seeing me, not just looking through me the way most people did. He looked at my belly, heavy with pregnancy. He looked at my bare feet, calloused and scarred. He looked at Clifton, sitting in the dirt nearby, blind and powerless, and instead of judgment, I saw something else in his expression. I saw compassion. I saw recognition of human suffering. How much for your water? He asked gently. I told him the price, barely able to speak. He bought water, but then he did something unexpected. He handed me a card and a substantial amount of money. I was moved by what I saw here, he said. A pregnant woman working this hard. Come find me. My address is on the card. Perhaps I can help. I stood there, stunned. As his driver helped him back into the Rolls Royce, I watched them drive away, the card trembling in my hand. That night, I told Clifton everything, and my heart sank when he reacted with fear. Don't go, he said immediately. Don't go to see him. It's not safe. We don't know him. Something could happen to you. We argued. For the first time since we'd learned to love each other, we really argued. I wanted to go. I felt it in my bones. This was an opportunity. This man had offered help when no one else ever had. But Clifton was terrified of losing me, terrified that something bad would happen, terrified that I would see how useless he was and decide to leave. I stayed firm. I'm going, I told him, but you're coming with me. He resisted. He argued that he was blind, that he would embarrass me, that I'd be better off going alone, but I wouldn't hear it. You come with me, I said, or I don't go at all. The next morning, we traveled to the address on the card. It was a mansion, the most beautiful building I'd ever seen. When we knocked on the door, we were ushered inside by servants who tried very hard not to wrinkle their noses at our appearance. The man came downstairs, and when he saw Clifton, he froze. His eyes went wide. Then he said something that would change everything. "Ah, my friend," he exclaimed. "How come? How did you become like this? What happened to you?" I looked at Clifton in confusion. Did they know each other? But before I could ask, the man began telling us a story. His name was Sidney Franklin, and years ago he and Clifton had been apprentices together. They'd worked for the same master, learning the trade. Clifton had finished his apprenticeship first and had started his own business with money that Sidney, along with other friends, had pulled together to help him start. For a while, Clifton had been doing well. He'd had a shop. He'd been becoming successful. Then everything fell apart. "Tell me," Sidney said gently, turning to Clifton, "what happened to your eyes?" And Clifton told him, he told us about the girl who had come into his life and stolen not just his shop, but his entire fortune. She had convinced him to trust her, to give her access to everything, and then she disappeared with it all. When he tried to chase after her, he tripped over something in the streets. Debris got into his eyes. By the time he got medical help, it was too late. The damage was too severe. The infection had set in. His sight was gone. I stood there listening to the story, realizing that I didn't know my own husband at all. That the man I'd married wasn't just a blind beggar. He was a man who had been betrayed, who had been broken, who had lost everything just like I had. And yet he'd never told me. He'd carried that shame alone all these years. Sidney's face was filled with emotion. "My friend, I'm going to help you. I'm going to take you to the best hospital in this city, the very best. They have doctors who specialize in these things. Maybe we can restore your sight. Maybe we can give you back what was stolen from you." I felt tears streaming down my face. I felt hope, real hope, for the first time in so long. And then just as Sidney finished speaking, I felt something shift inside me, a pain, a contraction. "I'm having the baby," I gasped. "The baby is coming." Everything became a blur of movement. Sidney called for a driver. We were rushed to the hospital. I was taken to a room, and then after hours of labor, I gave birth. Not to one child, but three beautiful babies, triplets, a boy and two girls. When I held them for the first time, I cried so hard that the nurses had to check if I was all right. Sidney paid for everything. He paid for my hospital stay. He paid for the best doctors. He paid for everything. And he did it without expecting anything in return. When I was discharged after 3 days, we went back to his house, not to our hut, but to his mansion. And we stayed there while Clifton prepared for his surgery. 2 weeks later, Clifton had the operation. It was a delicate procedure. The doctors had to carefully clean out the scar tissue and inflammation. They had to try to restore some function to his damaged eyes. For a month, he stayed in the hospital, bandages covering his face, waiting to see if the surgery had worked. The day the bandages came off was the day my heart almost stopped. I was there with him. The doctor slowly unwrapped the gauze. Clifton's eyes, his real eyes, not just the organs, but the windows to his soul, blinked open, and he looked directly at me. He looked at me for the first time in years. I watched his face as he saw me. I watched him take in my face, my eyes, my hair. I watched him begin to cry. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're so beautiful." I was wearing the plainest clothes. My hair was covered. I was not beautiful by any standard. But to him, to this man who had spent years unable to see, I was the most beautiful thing in the world, because I was finally visible to him, because he could finally see the woman who had stayed with him, who had loved him in the darkness. Our love, which had been built in shadows and silence, suddenly had light. It burned brighter than anything I'd ever felt. From that moment on, everything was different. Sidney became like a brother to us. He provided for us in ways we never could have provided for ourselves. He gave us money to live on. He helped us get a home, not a mansion, but a real home with real walls and real rooms for our children. He watched our triplets grow, and he was kind to them in a way that made me understand what a grandfather's love might feel like. Clifton healed. His sight didn't return completely. The damage was too extensive for that. But he could see our children's faces. He could see my face. He could see the world again. And with that gift came a new kind of strength. He started working again, doing things he could do despite his partial vision. He became a man again, not broken by what had happened to him, but rebuilt. Years passed, our children grew. We were happy. We were genuinely, truly happy in a way I never thought possible. I would wake up every morning next to Clifton and I would marvel at how far we'd come, from a forced marriage between two broken people to a real love, a real partnership, a real family. But I was about to discover that there was one more chapter in my story, one more lesson waiting to be learned. Clifton came to me one day and he said something that made my heart race. I want to go back, he said. I want to go back to the city where we came from. I want to show them. I want them to see what we've become. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me was afraid. What if the relatives mocked us again? What if they tried to take something from us? But another part of me, the part that had learned something through all this suffering, understood. He wanted them to see that their cruelty hadn't won. He wanted them to see that we had survived. We made arrangements. We worked with Sydney to plan the journey. And 6 years after we had left that city in disgrace, we were going back. But we weren't going back as broken beggars anymore. We were going back in a private jet. Can you imagine it? The preparation, the nervousness, the way I felt as we climbed aboard that aircraft. I'd never been on a plane before. My children looked out the windows in wonder, pressing their faces against the glass as we soared into the sky. Clifton held my hand and I could see that he was smiling. It wasn't a smile of revenge, it was a smile of redemption. When we landed, the entire city came out to see who had arrived in such a spectacular fashion. A private jet. No one in that city had ever seen anything like it. The streets were filled with curious people, all wondering who this mysterious family could be. We stepped out and I watched as recognition began to dawn on their faces. The way they looked at Clifton, really looked at him and saw that his eyes were no longer clouded. The way they looked at me and saw a woman who had been transformed by survival into something stronger. The way they looked at our children, healthy, beautiful, well cared for, and began to understand. My relatives came forward, confusion and shock written all over their faces. And I realized something in that moment. They were expecting me to be angry. They were expecting me to come back with vengeance in my heart, to punish them for what they'd done, to demand justice for the years of suffering they'd caused me. But I couldn't do that because somewhere in the journey from that girl they'd destroyed to the woman I'd become, I had learned something more valuable than anger. I had learned forgiveness. I introduced them to my children. I told them the story of how Clifton and I had ended up here. I told them about the years of struggle, the work we'd done to survive, the moment when kindness from a stranger had changed everything. I told them about how their cruelty, the very thing they'd done to break me, had actually forced me into the arms of a good man. It had forced me to be strong. It had forced me to learn what real love looks like. You thought you were punishing me, I told them quietly. You thought forcing me to marry a blind beggar was a curse, but it wasn't. It was the greatest blessing of my life. This man you wanted me to despise has become the greatest love of my life. These children you didn't believe we could have are my pride and joy. The suffering you thought would destroy me made me into someone I'm proud to be. I saw the tears in their eyes as they realized what they'd done. I saw the regret, the remorse, the understanding that they had tried to destroy someone, and instead they had accidentally set her free. When they asked for forgiveness, I didn't hesitate. I forgive you, I told them. I forgave you years ago, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free from the anger. I deserve to be happy, and I couldn't be happy while I was holding on to what you'd done to me. We stayed in the city for a few weeks. We showed our children the places where their parents had grown up. We showed them the market where we'd met. We showed them the small hut where we'd started our life together. And we showed them what it meant to rise above cruelty, to choose kindness, to build something beautiful from the rubble of what had been destroyed. When we left to return home, the entire city lined the streets to see us off. They watched as we boarded our private jet. They watched as we soared into the sky. And I watched them from the window, growing smaller below us. And I felt something settle in my heart. Peace. Real, deep, genuine peace. Do you want to know what I learned from all of this? What the real lesson is? It's this. Never underestimate anyone. Never judge someone by what you see on the surface. The blind beggar you walk past might have been a good man who fell on hard times through no fault of his own. The orphan girl you pity might become stronger than anyone you've ever known. The person you think is worthless might be the key to your own transformation. My relatives tried to destroy me by forcing me to marry Clifton. They thought they were removing a stain from the family. But what they actually did was connect me to the most important person in my life. They gave me a partnership built on real love, not on wealth or status. They forced me to learn who I really was when everything else was taken away. I don't regret any of it. Not the suffering, not the years of poverty, not the hunger or the humiliation, because all of it led me here. All of it led me to a life filled with love, with family, with purpose. All of it led me to understand that the greatest fortune in this world is not money or property. It's the people you love and the love you give back. Clifton and I live happily now. We have our children who will grow up knowing that their parents overcame impossible odds. They'll grow up knowing that kindness matters, that love matters, that you can lose everything and still have something more valuable. And whenever I see someone struggling, whenever I see someone judged unfairly, whenever I see someone treated as less than, I remember who I used to be. I remember that blind beggar. I remember the cruelty of my family. And I help because I know what it feels like to be invisible. I know what it feels like to be written off. And I'll never let another person feel that way if I can help it. This is my story. This is the lesson written in my life. Never underestimate anyone because you never know what they're capable of becoming. Never judge by appearances because the greatest treasures often come in the most unexpected packages. Never give up because the darkest night always leads to dawn. And if you're going through suffering right now, if you feel like the world has given up on you, if you feel like everything is impossible, don't give up. Keep going because I promise you there's another side to this. There's redemption, there's love, there's a version of your story where all of this pain transforms into purpose. This is what I learned by living it. So tell me now, what would you have done if you were me? Would you have gotten on that plane and gone back? Would you have forgiven them or would you have wanted revenge? And what about you? Do you see people in your own life that you've judged unfairly, that you've written off as less than? Maybe it's time to look at them again with new eyes. Maybe it's time to see the person they really are underneath all the circumstances that have tried to break them. Before you scroll away, I want you to do something for me. Subscribe to Pressify Stories and turn on that notification bell. We have over 100 stories just like this one. Stories of transformation, of redemption, of lessons that will change the way you see the world, like this video. Comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my situation. Would you have forgiven them? Would you have gone back? Would you have let go of the anger? And most importantly, please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's struggling. Share it with someone who's been judged unfairly. Let them know that they're not alone and that their story isn't over yet. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for caring enough to learn the lesson. I hope your life is filled with the same love and redemption that mine has been blessed with. And I hope you never underestimate anyone ever again. This is Esther Matthews, and this was my journey from the ashes to the light. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Until next time, keep believing in the impossible. Pressify Stories, where every story teaches you something about being human. See you in the next one.